So in this tutorial, I'm going to be going over the workflow for manipulating your images in Photoshop, some Illustrator, and then bringing it into Blender for the displacement and texture maps. So first, I'm just going to go over the file and the layer setup for the image that I had used for the previous example. And so you see I've got a bunch of layers here. So my master file was basically these two images, the color satellite view and the displacement or the height map. And what I did was, so the idea, is not simply to, or you're not asked to simply grab everything here and this becomes the final map, but this becomes kind of raw material to work with. And so what I'm looking for in this example was to how to mix and redistribute, let's say, high level of detail and articulation with more abstract, blank, and even kind of blurry or atmospheric kind of qualities. So the first thing I did was I duplicated these two layers. Actually, oh, actually, no, I brought in this one, yes. Okay. Let's just bring this back to normal for now. So I brought in this guy, and so this becomes a third image to work with all of this. And so the first thing we do is we need to assign that a transparency adjustment layer. And so I think I used multiply and brought this down to somewhere around 60. And then I added a black and white, so I'm converting it to black and white. And manipulating it there, and then with that I think I also multiply that. Oh, I forget exactly what I did, but I ended up with this guy. So you can see it's a combination of the height field map, those three maps, and so I basically blurred it. So the way to, well, I'll go over the techniques later, but so this becomes one layer amongst all these that work together. But the one that produces the final displacement map are these two together. So that's just simply, oh no, actually, and yes, that one. There it is. Yeah, so this is the displacement map, which is the one that I exported, which produced the kind of articulated surface. And then the actual texture map, the diffuse map, was all of this stuff. And so now you can see what I did here with this layer. Let me turn these off. So this layer I used a color range selector and selected a few of the colors from the original image and then brought those back up so that those are kind of high res, the kind of original detail of all of that area. And that goes against the kind of more fuzzy, kind of blurry, softer areas. So this will be a kind of composite image. This is one example of that. So you can see I started to mask out on this layer, start to delete or mask out areas of that high res. So I start to get a mix of the kind of high res, low res, and then making sure that the kind of abstract lines and shapes from the that painting start to come through. So I'm trying to find a way to redistribute all of those things into this even field. But obviously I get much more articulation in these areas from the satellite photo. So now let's just do this start from scratch. So this is my original, the master file from the satellite view and the height map. And this was that reference image that was brought in order to scale and line them up, which we don't need anymore, so I'm just going to delete that guy for now. Now I'm just going to bring in one of these abstract images in here. So which one should I try this time? Let's go ahead and bring this guy in. So the first thing we want to do, well, we could scale in here, but I'm going to do it through here on its own first. And the one thing you want to check, and these are grabbed off of Google, so they're low res. We get these, these kind of overlap zones right here. So one way to circumvent that is I'm going to go bring this into Illustrator first. This is quite a low res image. Okay, and I will, we're just going to do an image trace, and we want to use the ones with the colors. So you want to find out how many colors you have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to use 6 colors. So this should give us kind of crisp lines. Should clean that stuff up, hopefully. Yes, it did. Great. Okay, yeah, so we don't have that kind of weird doubled edge there. Oh, do we? Let's see. Did it clean it up? Let's ungroup it. Okay, yeah, we're good. So in the other ones, sometimes with the other options for the image trace, it still gives you that kind of overlap zone there. So now with this, I'm just going to scale this up to the page. We're just going to basically re-export this. There we go, 12 inches. And then now I'm going to adjust the artboard to match it. And we want to make sure in this case that it's a perfect square. So I've got 12 inch by 12 inch. Okay. Now all we need to do is export it. And same thing. I'm going to do PNG this time. And I'm going to go at 600 ppi because it's so small, and we're going to have to scale it up or size it up. So this will give us enough resolution to do that. Okay, so now let's go back to Photoshop. So now I should be able to just drag that in here. Let's make sure I've got the right one. Yeah, that one. And then let's just go ahead and match it to this size. So this image is 31. Okay, let's make that. Let's make sure this is a square. Let me change my canvas size. Pixels for 24. And I'll just do it from the bottom. Okay. So what was that size again? 4224, 72 dpi. We'll just change our image size to match that. 72. Oops. Okay, now we can just select all, copy it, and bring in here. And then let's go ahead and add a black and white adjustment layer, and we want to click this little down arrow so it only corresponds to that layer. And then let's go ahead and hit multiply and maybe bring the opacity down a little bit. So now we're starting to get that. So I'm not going to fuss over this too much right now in terms of customizing it. The important thing now is to just set up the workflow in the file. because we don't really know exactly what this is going to do until we get to Blender. But you should know that the black colors will be the lowest part of your surface and the white will be the highest part of your surface. And that these sharp lines, basically they give us those kind of abrupt kind of changes in the topography. So it starts to look more like tectonic activity on it as opposed to the kind of, let's say, natural formation of, in this case, volcano or this mountain peak. So I'm going to stop there with that. Now I'm going to, let's turn these guys off for now. Now I'm going to duplicate this layer. And I'm going to convert it to a smart object. So just right click on that, convert to smart object. And what this allows me to do is I'm going to blur it. Go to Gaussian blur. And so this is going to give me a kind of soft, we want to get it, something around there is fine. And so the reason why I changed to a smart filter is that this is non-destructive. So if I don't like what it's giving me later, I can double click on this and change this and I'll update it. And so that's the one nice thing about working with that. And another thing to note, let's so you kind of have to mess with these because they always behave a little differently. You're not sure what you're going to get. You want to test these out. So I'm just seeing what it's giving me with the overall color as well as the height map image and the art image. But so if you ever want to, let's say, I want to create I want this to be an image, its own layer that I can manipulate all together. Whatever layers are on or visible and showing, if you go Control Shift Alt E, it will basically create a flattened copy of that layer. And so let's just move this all the way to the top. So now everything that we saw is on one layer. So now this is another thing that I can manipulate and then add to all this stuff. So that's just something to, just so that you know how that works. And then the last thing I'll do with this file is I'll bring back some of the original kind of detail from that image. And so to do that, I'm going to make another copy. So it's always good, you never want to just work on the original layer, always make copies so that you have the original, it's always there. So let's go ahead and make another duplicate of that. And now what I'm going to do is color select. I'm going to go to select. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can do it using a threshold or color range selector. I like this version better, you have more control. But let's just say I wanted to, I guess in this case, let's just bring back the snow or the dirt feature. So I'm just going to use this dropper, and you can see I'm hitting shift, so I just keep adding. And so you'll see this is the selection, it's just growing. I'm just adding to that selection here. And the fuzziness kind of will expand on that a bit. And so when you think it's good, you hit OK, and then you'll see that it's selected all that area. So now this is area that I can bring back that detail. Might be too much, but we'll see. And so now we want to actually mask that out. So there you go. So now I've masked it. And let's bring it back on top here. And then let's turn all this back on. So then you can see what we start to get. And so this might be too much detail. I think yeah, I did something like that with it before. So it's getting a little muddied up here. I'm not too happy with that, but this is the basic workflow. Let's go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer, a master one, so we can control the light values there. And might also bring in a hue saturation. If we wanted to pop some of that color out a little bit. But that's a general idea. So let's go ahead and test this in Blender. So first thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and export this guy. Let me see if a different one of these works a little bit better. Maybe pin light's a little bit better. Oh yes, the other thing I was going to show actually is now if we wanted to not have that all that detail in the whole place, we can simply use, if I'm on this layer and I go ahead and go to Magic Wand, then it's selecting that region. I can come back to this layer in the mask, and with my brush B, I'm just going to wipe that out. And so there I've gotten rid of that. Why isn't this coming through? I'm going to add, oh, the black and white is on that. That's why. We don't want that there. There we go. That's why I had an extra black and white on there. Okay. There, that's a little bit better. Okay. But so you can get things like that, so we can begin to mix the kind of blurry and the kind of highly detailed areas. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Okay. So I'm going to test that out. I'm going to go ahead and now that we're ready, make sure we save. And then now I'm going to save as a PNG. And let's go ahead and call it Mount Shasta Diffuse. Well, let's just do JPEG. PNGs are better file formats because you lose less data. JPEGs are the worst, but JPEGs for our purposes, for my purposes anyway, are smaller and faster to go through. PNGs sometimes take a while. Diffuse. Oops. Let me just add an X there. Okay, and let's do the same thing, but just with don't need that. There we go. And let's try that. And so this would be our displace. All right, so let's now go into Blender. Oh, one thing before I forget, make sure, go ahead and just think of this square as a 200 by 200 foot surface. And so when you're selecting images and laying them out, you're free to scale the images, the kind of abstract images accordingly, because you want to start to think about them spatially. Not just in terms of how they mix as an image, but you're starting to look at them dimensionally, like, okay, if this was a slot of space, what would this width be if this was 200 feet? So you can begin to use the rulers as a guide to give you some sense of scale of this stuff, right? So if we had things that were super fine, then we're going to get kind of a lot of kind of striated space and smaller scale. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, let's move to Blender. So I've got Blender open, and it might look a little bit different than your default window, but hopefully you guys know how to, use these things in the corner, in the upper right and the lower left, those kind of three lines there, to expand windows. Whenever you expand a window, you get this new toolbar, this is the toolbar for this window, and you can turn that off and on by hitting T. Same thing here if I do it there. If I want to get rid of this, I just go back to that and drag into that. You'll see that arrow, and it'll just eat that guy up. So I think you guys probably have one down here, which is the timeline for animation. I just got rid of that. Let's see what else. Hopefully the other tutorials kind of covered most of these things. This is your actual almost like the outliner in Maya. It's like every object shows up in here. And so this is the best place for now to manage all of our stuff in terms of visibility and all that stuff. Down here is the actual layers in Blender, which is super bizarre. I mean, we'll use them, but this is a little bit awkward, and I know that they're changing this in 2.8. But yeah, down here is all of the different tool settings that we'll use for a space. Another one is I tend to use the GPU compute for rendering. If you have a good render or a good video card, then that's what you want to use. It has to have CUDA on it. And in your user preferences, oh yes, while we're here, user preferences, global undo, make sure that's on. Steps, I think the maximum is 256. Memory limit 0, which just means unlimited. You want to make sure that you get that on. And what else? Where is it? Yeah, here it is. On system, I have my Cycles Compute Devices CUDA, and make sure that if you have, I'm guessing you guys have decent video cards that have CUDA, so you might want to enable that. And then the add-ons. So the add-ons are great. This is a fantastic feature of Blender. It comes with a bunch of built-in ones that they're off. They're not, by default, they're not on, so you have to turn them on. So these are the ones that I have. And the way, if you just type in here, it'll take you to it, and then you can just click and turn on. But the ones that we'll need to make sure that you have is 3D View Display Tools. What else is built in that you should have? There should be a import export wavefront OBJ format. What else? Mesh edit tools, make sure that's on. Node Wrangler, that's really good, make sure that's on. Render cycles, render engine. That should be about it for now. And then when you've done all that, just say save user settings and close this out. Okay, so first thing we need to do is let's set our units. So we're actually going to be working to scale in Blender. So let's go up here. No, it's this one. Yeah, this one. It's the scene setup. So go to units, and we'll do the unit presets. We want feet, imperial, unit scale, just like that one. And then we should be good to go. Okay, so first thing is let's just create a mesh plane. So Shift A, mesh plane. And yeah, this is always a weird thing is that it shows up depending on where your cursor is. Actually, let me undo that. So there's my cursor, and if we right click, oh, let me go over this too, in case this hasn't been covered. User preferences, interface, is it interface or editing? I always forget which one it is, but we want to change this so that, here it is, on input, select with left, unless you like selecting with the right. I don't know why Blender default, it says select by right button click. But so just click left, and that way you'll be selecting with the left mouse button, and then the right will be to locate the cursor. Okay. So now you'll see I'm clicking with the right mouse button, and that's where he locates the cursor. So this is actually pretty useful. So when you start to have geometry and stuff in here, if you want to create a object near an area, you just right click and then it'll put it right there. But another way to move this is by going, what is it? Okay. We want to move, it's a Shift S is cursor to center. There you go. So Shift S will bring this up. And so this down here is another way to reset the cursor. And this is if you have something selected. So you can move like this to an object or an object to this thing. And then Control Shift Alt C is setting the origin of things. So we'll use this a little bit later. Okay, so now with that thing there, when I go Shift A, Mesh, Plane, that guy will show up there. And here's the size. Let's just go 200. And if I want to frame select this in the number pad, it's the period button. So that'll frame the selection there. So now we've got a 200-foot plane. Next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and subdivide that. So I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, which is also down here. And with it selected, let's go ahead here, make sure you're on the tools, go subdivide. Only allows you to do this to 10. That's fine, we'll just do subdivide again. And another 10. And I think that's what I started with. So the thing with this, we're setting the resolution for the displacement map. And so obviously the higher resolution, the better quality we're going to get, but the heavier it gets. And so if we look up here, we've got 14,000 faces, which is not too bad. So let's try, if I subdivide again, 58,000. Now let's undo. Let's try to keep it here for now. We're going to add a modifier later that will subdivide this again. But let's just leave it here to see what it does. And again, we can always come back later and subdivide it. Okay. So our mesh is set. Now let's go into the modifier, a little wrench there. Go add modifier. Oh, what I'm going to do, this grid is always bugging me. So I'm going to hit N to open up the kind of attributes of the object, the properties bar. And let's deselect that. Where is view? Grid floor. Turn that off. Okay. There we go. Hide that back. Okay, so let's go back to add modifier, and we're looking for displace, which is right there. So now we need to assign the texture image. So go ahead and on this button, just click new. Now we need to go find it. So we don't do it through here. We're going to go over here to this button, which is a texture tab. And we want to make sure that this is set to displace texture. And let's go image, open, and then go ahead and find your image. Let's see, my 2GBX, Photoshop, Mount Shasta, displace. There we go. And that is not working. Ah, yes, we forgot to do something very important here, which is we need to UV map it. Okay, so let's go tab mode, everything's selected. Go to U, and let's go, actually let's get out of this. I'm going to hit 7 to go into top view, and let's make sure that we're in orthographic mode, meaning that This is orthographic. If you hit 5 to toggle between perspective and orthographic, so make sure you're in orthographic. Hit 7 to go to plan view. Go U for unwrap, and we're going to go project from view. And then now to check that, we're going to go in this pane, we're going to click here and go to the UV image editor. Okay, so what we want is we want this to fit to bounds. Scale to bounds, there we go. So now that fits, so now our image, everything will fit nicely in there. Okay, so now it should be set, but why isn't it working still? Let's go back to our modifier. Okay, so we have to bump up the strength quite a bit. So because we scaled it up, this is why. So now by manipulating that, we can now set the displacement for it. So this just kind of basically, let's just leave it at 0.5. It's not important. So let's try 30. So remember, we're at scale, so we can begin to give this thing some sense of dimension to understand that. We're not really quite getting our mountain, are we? Let's go to 100. Okay, so our mountain's good, but now we can start to see what we're getting. And so if we don't like things like this, we manipulate the image. And so we might go back to Photoshop and figure out it's this guy, right? This is the whitest part, so it's wanting to rise a lot. And so now what I might do is on that layer, I can select that. And add an adjustment layer just for that guy. Let's try it. No, it's not going to do it for that one. Okay, let's do it another way.